made it to Chiro Hustle. Sit back and learn from the greatest influencers in the profession on the world's #1 chiropractic podcast. Before we dive into this powerful episode, please remember to subscribe to our channels and give us a 5-star rating on iTunes and to continue hustling. This episode is sponsored by Transact Card, Align Life, Neuro Infinity, Imaging Services, Chiro Health USA, Chiro Moguls, Pure Chiro Notes, Titronics, Sherman College of Chiropractic, New Patients in a Box, Life Chiropractic College West, Pro Hockey Chiros, Pro Baseball Chiros, and the IFCO. Let's hustle.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 516 of the Chiro Hustle podcast. I'm your producer, Luke Millette, and here's your host, James Chester.
So today we have the opportunity of interviewing Danny Ozment. And if you want to hear how once you listen to podcasts to educate yourself, you learn more about who you're interviewing. And last but not least, give away your best stuff. Stay tuned for this episode. All right, welcome back. This is another episode of the Chiro Hustle podcast. Today I have Danny Ozment coming in, not a chiropractor, but a podcast marketing specialist, and I'm really excited to have him on today. But before we get into this episode, I'm going to let everyone know the big why. Why do we do what we do over here at Chiro Hustle? Well, first things first is protecting freedom of speech. I think that's so important. We've never censored anyone on our platform before, and I think that it's really important that we give people the opportunity to be not only acknowledged, seen, and heard, but to speak their truth, whatever that may be. We also support medical freedom and family health freedom. Those are things that are really important to me as an individual, and I hope they're important to you also. After that, we get a bit more philosophical. We protect BJ Palmer's Sacred Trust. If you want to learn a whole lot more about chiropractic, you don't know anything about chiropractic, and you go search for BJ Palmer's Sacred Trust or BJ Palmer's Last Words, you're going to learn so much more about chiropractic than you ever knew before. And then we also support subluxation-based chiropractic. That's a big word. Once again, if you want to learn more about that, go and search subluxation and chiropractic. You're going to keep on educating yourself about this beautiful profession. And then we also believe in innate intelligence and universal intelligence. We believe that when man or woman, the physical gets adjusted, it connects them to man or woman, the spiritual. So with that being said, Danny, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jim, for having me.
Yeah, I got your bio and I was just like, wow, this guy understands podcasting really well. And then I got a chance to have like a little pre-chat with you and talk to you about chiropractic. And I was kind of like, building the story for us and building the brand of what we're going to talk about today. And one of those things was supporting chiropractic as a profession. Yeah. So if we can just open up and you can just kind of tell me like your support of chiropractic. I know you said you've seen a handful of practitioners over years. Maybe share with us your insight on that.
Well, for me, it was I'm 45 years old, and in the last 20 years of my life, I've learned more and more, mostly through podcasts and listening to podcasts, about some of the other things that are out there in terms of health and making us health and wellness, let's say. And, maybe 15 years ago now, I started thinking about, like I'm at that point 30 years old. Why do these things hurt in the morning? Why am I annoyed? Well, I'm sitting down more for my job now as a recording engineer, things like that. I'm feeling uncomfortable. And so that's when I first saw a chiropractor, and it was something as simple as, why does my right foot always hurt? And doing just I forget what the machine is where they mapped how my feet were pressing on the ground and getting a custom orthotic that straightened my right knee, which straightened this and solved other things. All the way up to even a couple of years ago, of course, we took some time off during the pandemic, and that was one of the things that sort of went by the wayside, was going to see the chiropractor every couple of weeks. And I bought a new chair. Being in the recording industry, you have to have a good chair. So I've always had good ergonomic chairs that help me out. And I got a new chair and have a standing desk and all these things. And I noticed after a few months, I was like, man, every time I'm standing, after like 15 minutes, my back starts to tighten up and I'm like in pain. So I went to the chiropractor and started getting Graston technique, I think is what it's called. Never had that before. And immediately within like 3 weeks, the pain was gone. The chiropractor even took a look at the brochure, like manual for the chair that I bought, which is a really good chair. And she was like, "Oh, raise the lumbar support up like 2 inches from where you have it right now." And I'm like, "Okay," and that solved the problem too. So I've continued to, throughout all this time, combine chiropractic and massage therapy to just make sure that in a job where I have to sit down a lot, I can stay healthy and play with my 2 kids every day after I'm done.
Yeah, just to, add to that, I believe that if we don't pay for our health now, we pay for sickness later.
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
basically what you're saying is things that I reinforce with people all the time is chiropractic helps with your gait.
Hmm.
It helps with your proprioception, which is your balance.
Yes.
It helps with your core stability. It helps, the label of pain. It helps with pain.
Hmm.
It does a fantastic job at helping find the tension in people's bodies and releasing that. In chiropractic, we call those subluxations. So
Hmm.
they find that tension in the spine, and then they adjust and remove that subluxation and allow the body to heal naturally.
Hmm.
And I always tell people the body doesn't need anything extra in it. It simply needs no interference. So if we're able to correct that, clear it up, now the body is a self-healing organism.
Hmm.
So there's not pills, potions, or lotions that the body really needs. It simply needs to be able to have full mobility. It needs to have full strength.
Hmm.
Needs to have full nervous system flow. So that's why I fell so deep in love with the profession, because I saw it actually doing that. I worked in a clinic for 6 years,
Hmm.
and I saw what was happening when somebody would come in like you'd be like, gosh, my low back's hurting, my foot's giving me
Hmm.
issues. And then by like the seventh visit, we would go back and do a re-eval on them, and we'd ask them if they remembered why they originally came in for. And
Hmm.
probably over 50% of them couldn't remember why they originally came in for, because the issue is so far away from their reality that it wasn't even a concern to them anymore. So that's pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and using chiropractic as a wellness model rather than a crisis care model, I
Hmm.
think is really important too. So anybody that listens to our show, I always encourage them. I mean, typically it's chiropractors we interview, but I
Hmm.
always encourage the people listening to find somebody, where they can go at least get checked and get some x-rays and see what's going on with their body, so they can not deal with some of the things that people come in for, like at 40 some years old.
Hmm.
Sometimes people haven't taken care of themselves for 40 straight years, and they come into the chiropractor and they expect one miracle adjustment to like change their life.
Yeah.
And that they don't actually understand the fact that over time
Yeah.
it's a degenerative process. If we don't take care of ourselves and self-manage ourselves and take care of like the concerns that we're dealing with over
Hmm.
time, it has a degenerative process, and then you have to rehab the body.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I know that your position in this world is helping people with
Hmm.
podcast, and branding and launches and
Hmm.
things like that. So why do you think, and what have you experienced being a podcast coach or a podcast launch guru? What have you seen being the things that are purposes why chiropractors might want to consider starting their own podcast?
Well, it comes down to something simple for me, and I can sum this up in a story. Um, I lived in the Washington D.C. area for a while, and that's where I first started seeing a chiropractor. And then we moved to Nashville for 4 years, and now we live in Orlando. And so, what did I do? After I found a primary care physician, what did I do when I got to Orlando to find a chiropractor? Well, I went to Google, and I went to Google My Business, and I looked at the reviews and found the closest chiropractor who had the best reviews. Okay, and that was it. Like that was I didn't get referred by anyone. I didn't have any friends in the area, and it relates to a story that is not necessarily unique to Florida now, but in Florida, Central Florida, a lot of people have solar panels, right? And solar panels are a significant investment. So when we wanted to add solar panels, again, I went to Google My Business, and in Central Florida, of course, there's like thousands of contractors that will do solar panels. So I was like, well, who do I pick? So I narrow it down, best reviews. I set up some meetings with some people. I have the meetings with them, and then I pick the person that I trusted the most. Okay. I didn't have that luxury with the chiropractor because I was like, I don't want to drive far. I know I'm going to have to go multiple times, maybe a month or every month. Let's pick this one because they look the best reviewed. And then I liked the person and trusted the person. But it came down to trust. And so I even had this conversation with the solar panel guy when he was sitting at my kitchen table and we're signing the agreement for, this, I think it was like $80,000 or something like that to put in this system. And I said to him, hey, like if you had a podcast, even a few episodes on your site, I would have gone to your site, been able to listen to you tell me these things, and I would have trusted you more than the other people that didn't have anything. And I would have known, oh, I like this guy, or I like this lady from the beginning. And so for me, that's what it comes down to for not just chiropractors, but anybody that provides a professional service, any medical practice, law firms, um, people come to you and need your help. So they have to trust you. And that's what gets them in the door. That's what keeps them there. And so if you can do anything that makes that easier up front, then you should do it. So for me, that's why I think any medical practice, any practice like any chiropractor would benefit from having some form of content marketing. If it's not podcasting, a blog, YouTube channel, something that allows them to establish trust from the beginning.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Third party validation is massive for anybody purchasing, even if you're going to go to like an online shopping situation, whether it's a designer watch or whether it's spark plugs for your car.
Yeah.
Like you're going to go and like look at like what people have to say about it.
Yeah. The people that are listening to this podcast, they likely listen to other podcasts, right? And you can sit there, listeners who are with us right now, you can sit there and realize, oh, these people that I'm listening to, I kind of feel like they're my friend because I spend a lot of time with them. If they have a weekly show, I might be spending 30 minutes every week with them. They're in my car with me while I'm commuting. And that's where that trust, that relationship builds up. And so you can start to see that, yes, it's nice to get a referral. Like if my friend had told me about this chiropractor, I've been like, oh yeah, let me go see her. That sounds like a great idea. A podcaster is the same thing. A podcast, even if it's the host who is recommending that they come see you, if they've listened to you for a few episodes and they've spent a couple hours with you, that's basically a friendship at that point, and they're going to trust you. So often I refer to podcasting as it's referral marketing on a grand scale, because you are the friend of someone recommending a service to them that they can then trust you for. But instead of speaking one to one, you're often speaking 1 to 50, 1 to 100, 1 to 1,000. And it's magnified. It's an exponential thing where the referrals just pour in more because you have that relationship with people.
So I think let's get a little granular because
Sure.
we're talking podcasting, the impact of it, third party validation, things of that, and why that we're talking a lot about the why. Now I'm curious, recommendation like strategy. Do you believe that people should be doing solo, like talking like monocast, or do you think that they should be doing shows like this, interviews?
We like, it's great to get granular like that, but that answer comes from stepping back and saying, okay, so if you're a professional services provider, if you are a doctor, a chiropractor, doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, a therapist, whatever, you are creating content for a reason, to reach a certain group of people. And so what is the goal? What are you trying to provide to them? If you are, let's say, trying to educate, like you're doing a lot where you're educating an industry. So a podcast like that is really great to do lots of interviews, talk to lots of experts, see what's out there, support certain things, establish certain things, provide evidence for certain things. Whereas someone who's running a private practice, their goal might be, well, you know what, if I had 6 episodes, and I don't even need to have them out on Apple Podcasts. They could just be on my website because people are Googling and they're coming to my website. I just need to tell people these 8 things about chiropractic and how it can help them, or the expertise that I provide, like the certain techniques that are different. Or maybe it's the fact that in our office we have um, me, but I do these techniques, but we also have X-ray, and we have these therapeutic procedures and machines that we can use. And like, we do e-stem, but like we also, I know my chiropractor now has this like the compression therapy and things like that. And
Decompression.
they've got this like big orange beanbag looking chair that you can put the compression boots on, and I was like, oh, that's great, because I've heard about, I'm an avid cyclist, so I hear like how that helps endurance athletes, and I'm like, oh, I want to try that at some point.
Mhm.
But it's, what could you do in an episode that would establish that? And so if that's the doctor speaking, great. If that's bringing on some of the staff to talk about it and establish that this is a team and here are other people you might meet, great. Or if I'm trying to think, I've got right now a new client who works with medical practices, but he's a entrepreneurial operating system expert. If you know about EOS, it's like the rocket fuel guys. I forget the author's name.
Gino Wickman.
Yeah. And so he's a coach that helps businesses install this to manage their teams, but he primarily works with healthcare practices, medical practices. So his episodes are a mixture of some solo where he's teaching certain things, and then let's talk to some of my clients and see what their experiences have been like. Let's talk to this expert who's an expert more in SOPs and things like that, and can talk to us about how to automate and how to use AI to do this, like whatever. So he has a mixture. So that's why I say, like, that question is it depends. What is the goal? And then, okay, it's a mix, or do all interviews, because you're really trying to add, a lot of advocacy for an industry, or for we have another client. He runs a company that builds communication towers, like cell phone towers. And he's starting a podcast to advocate for worker safety, because there's not a lot of standards across state lines. Different states have different standards. In some states, workers are really at risk, all those types of things. And so he started a podcast that is solely, I want to talk to people, get these stories out there. Maybe it's self-serving for my brand, and people will start to know me as the industry expert and advocate, but he's mostly doing interviews in that situation.
You've made it to Chiro Hustle. Sit back and learn from the greatest influencers in the profession on the world's #1 chiropractic podcast. This episode is sponsored by Transact Card, Align Life, Neuro Infinity, Imaging Services, Chiro Health USA, Chiro Moguls, Pure Chiro Notes, Titronics, Sherman College of Chiropractic, New Patients in a Box, Life Chiropractic College West, Pro Hockey Chiros, Pro Baseball Chiros, and the IFCO. Let's hustle. Yeah, when I meet people, this is just my add-on to that is I tell people to create based off of Russell Brunson. I've read all of his stuff and watched probably more videos from that guy than anybody else.
Yeah.
And I tell people to create their Dream 100, create their Dream 100 of topics, lists
People
of things that they could talk about specifically, like topical stuff, and keep those to about 5 minutes, and like create content that they could say, okay, we're going to talk about like sciatica today.
Okay.
And we're going to like create a 5-minute, like, personal talk about this. And then I also tell them to create another tier, which is people they would like to interview. And I tell them to really dial in on the best businesses around their community and call it Spotlight Orlando, where I'll tell them to go and find the top 100 businesses that they like within Orlando and bring those people on for 20-minute spotlight interviews
Mhm.
to co-brand and cross-pollinate and be
Yep.
the host of.
Yep.
So I tell them, these are really good strategies if you want to become like the go-to and the referable and the know,
Mhm.
like, and trust effect. Like, these are really great strategies that people can watch and they can take away from what they're doing. And now they have expert positioning.
Yeah.
Now they have a solo cast, they have an interview show, and now they're able to do different things. And they can work with a company like
Mhm.
yours that can take that content and deploy it, distribute it, and use that as pillar content
Yep.
and create one to many. And I
Yeah.
think that that's the strategy that we'll talk about a little bit down the line on today's interview. But
Mhm.
I'm really, I kind of, unless you wanted to like tie something up on the back end of this, but I'm really curious about, we were off camera talking about the power of masterminds.
Yeah.
But I also think that podcast is like the power of a mastermind. It's
Well,
like
yeah,
it's
and
like taking B&I on the road.
I was just about to say I actually have 2 clients. Well, he's one client with 2 shows, and he's in the real estate industry. He's a real estate everything. He's an investor. He runs an agent. He runs a team. Like all he does is real estate, and he specifically has started 2 podcasts, one for investors, one for agents, as essentially a virtual mastermind where they're not speaking up, but they get to hear his conversations with other experts. They get to hear his conversations with one of his team members who's an agent. He's a coach, like, actually a real certified coach, not just someone who says, "Hey, I'm a life coach." Um, so he spent a year, he's a former lawyer. So he's got a lot of expertise in working in these industries. But he's solely created a podcast because he's like, a lot of these agents that are new, they can't afford to join a mastermind. They're not getting any support from their brokerages. They need something. And so, like, we're going to start a podcast where we just talk about, like, what are the top 3 things a new agent should do every morning? What are the 3 lessons learned from this? What are the things you should spend money on as an agent? Should you join a team or not? Like, all these types of things. And it's the type of stuff you would talk about in a mastermind. So yeah, you really can. A podcast can be anything you want it to be, honestly.
Yeah, it builds clarity and it
Hmm.
gives you a voice. And
Yeah.
from my position, now I get a chance to speak on some of the biggest stages in the chiropractic
Hmm.
profession at seminars, state association events, different, technique seminars. People will ask me to come in.
Hmm.
And when people listen to our show, guess what? There's probably 500 digital marketing companies out there that have never worked in a chiropractic clinic, that have never sold chiropractic services in person,
Hmm.
and never had a podcast, never made documentaries. So when people hear my story, they're like, huh, I trust this guy. I
Yeah.
want him to do lead gen for us. I want
Right.
him to be the guy that, runs our digital marketing campaigns. I want
Hmm.
him to be the guy that comes and speaks to our group and tells them about why it's important to do, boots on the ground marketing and why it's important to do new school marketing, which is, digital ad campaigns and things like that. So it gives you expert positioning too.
Hmm. Hmm.
Have you seen that with some of your clients after they launch, they like start to get more opportunities to do like, speaking engagements and
Oh yeah.
becoming more featured in their communities?
I mean, we have some clients who specifically have podcasts because they are speakers, so that they can continually plant seeds about the fact that they are a speaker. That even those professional speakers, they're continuously getting leads from their podcast where someone's like, "Oh, this person canceled. We didn't know you were a speaker, but we heard your podcast and you obviously can speak." Um, and then you see others where that's not necessarily a goal, but it happens. Where if they are like, I was mentioning Darren, who's in the communications industry, he is speaking more now because of his podcast. He already had some stature because of his position as a industry leader who owned a company, who has this reputation. But for instance, there's a big, I forget what the name of the conference was, but it's here in Orlando earlier this year, at the Rosen Shingle Creek Hotel, and it's one of the bigger communication industry conferences. And this year, because he had a podcast, They recorded a live episode in one of the main featured keynote sessions of the conference, and they were talking about, so next year we're going to do this, this, and this, because you have a podcast, and there was only like 2 or 3 other people that have podcasts, but he's better at it and it sounds better and things like that. So yeah, we see that happening pretty regularly, where I'll step back again, it comes down to, a podcast is a body of work. Just like if you wrote a book, if you have a YouTube channel where you've got thousands of videos on your YouTube channel, if you have 500 podcast episodes like you, how can I not consider you an expert?
Yeah,
Even
right.
if you had even if you had 50 podcast episodes and you were consistent over a year and an episode came out every week, people look at that, people who want to hire you, people who want to get you to speak, who want to need your services or want to recommend you to someone. They look at that and they say, wow, this person did half an hour to 45 minutes every week for a year. You can't BS that. Like, you've really got to know something and be an expert to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Even if people may not agree with you, like, there's something in the consistency and the ability to stick with it that impresses people and leads to bigger and better things.
Yeah. Consistency in the marketplace matters.
Mhm.
And I tell people this, never think about your first 10 episodes. Think of your first 100 episodes. If you think of your first 100 episodes and you come out as a weekly show, you've made it 2 years.
Yeah, I'll tell you, even before we get to the point, like, hey, if you want to work with Danny, this is how you do it. I tell people in the first call, look, we have a 6-month minimum, because if you don't stick with us for 6 months and pay us monthly for 6 months, I don't want to work with you, because I know your podcast is going to fail. Like, there's no way, if you're not going to do it for 6 months and get at least 30 to 40 episodes, 30 episodes, 25 episodes out there, the podcast is going to die on the vine. It's not going to build the audience that it needs. It's not going to build that organic growth that a podcast needs, that level of trust, that consistency, where people can be like, oh yeah, you got to check out this podcast because this I've been listening for like 3 months now and it's really great stuff. You have to have that. You have to be able to stick with it and do at least 6 months to a year on a podcast.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I appreciate it coming from a professional podcast guy giving this advice, because I can tell people all day how I think they should produce, but hearing it from you, it backs up a lot of the things I tell people about podcasting. So I think it gives people a lot of clarity and a lot of third party validation also, which I think is important when it comes to, running a show like we do, because I always want people to go out there and do more. But obviously people have to be consistent with their approach to anything that they do. And I think that it's really cool that you come from that background of teaching people, coaching people, making sure people stick with it. So that kind of tees me up for the, second to last question. Who are some of the people that help inspired you, like, to become who you are today? Like, I mentioned Russell Brunson, but my podcast mentor coach was Ed Osborne. Like, who's helped you become who you are today?
Well, yeah, I stick with there's been plenty of books that I've read and things like that, but I have to credit 2 people really. One is kind of my mentor in the recording space. His name's Bill Hare, and he's a Grammy award-winning engineer. But I started out as a musician. I have a master's degree in conducting. That's a whole other story. I worked in the classical music nonprofit arts industry for 10 years in DC. And we mentioned on the pre-call, my daughter has some medical issues that resulted from a birth injury. So when she was born, really quickly, I was in this space of, oh gosh, I can't do this career that I'm doing anymore, because we need flexibility. So I was at this point where I'm like, I got to figure out something to do where I can work from home and start a business and all of that stuff. And Bill was one of those people that worked in the industry, that was in the particular niche that I was interested in and had some background in, where he was just like, yeah, I'll show you this stuff. Yeah, I'll introduce you to this person. Oh yeah, you know what you're doing. This sounds good. Here, try this, do this. Like, he gave away all his secrets. He'd been in the industry for decades and was like, I don't care. You're not going to knock me off my throne or whatever. Here's this. And he's always been that way for everybody that's gotten into that industry. Then I think the other person is Mike Kim. Mike is a personal branding specialist where when I was starting to consider getting into the podcasting space, because musicians are frustrating. And I'm a musician, so I can understand. I went to a podcasting conference and I met Mike, and Mike had been podcasting, I think, for almost a year at that point. So he was at the beginning of his career journey, again, coming out of a corporate job into sort of this entrepreneurial space. And I met him at this conference, and he was just this nice guy. And we hung out, and he didn't even tell me about his podcast. Like, that was how dumb it was. And then it was maybe 6 months later, I started listening to his podcast, and I was like, oh crap, this is really good stuff. Like, I'm going to do that. And then everything he told me in his podcast worked. So I joined his mastermind and bought courses. And, 7 years later, almost 8 years later now, I'm still in his masterminds. He's probably responsible for a third of our clients in terms of referrals. He is a client himself. We do his podcast. Like I said, I'm still in his mastermind, and he's been just selfless in giving, and helped solidify that lesson for me, these two, Bill and Mike, that the way forward, the way to grow in business and grow your business is to be selfless in giving to other people, help other people out, because it will come back to you, and you'll find the good people when you do that.
So in closing, I know everybody at this point wants to work with you.
Sure.
Where can we send them to?
The easiest place to go is emeraldcitypro.com. That you go to that site, you'll learn all the things that we do. There's a lot of helpful information on there too about podcasting and what it entails. What are the things that we do? Like I've said earlier, we work with a lot of professional services. So solo and small law firms, medical practices, accounting firms, therapists, coaches, consultants. And the reason we specialize in that is our model is that essentially all we want you to do is record. If you can record a podcast episode, we can do everything else. We can do the production, we can do the promotion, we can do the marketing and the growth. We focus on a strategy of repurposing. So we take what this is going to be like a 30-minute episode, and that's a lot of words. That's a lot of content. And we can take a 30-minute podcast episode and turn it into something for your website and an email and a blog post and YouTube content and social media content, etc. Because when you're busy and you're running a small business or you're running your own practice, you don't have a lot of time, and you certainly don't have the team members often that can do all of your marketing for you. So we kind of come in as the surrogate marketing agency and can do that just by you creating podcast content.
Super cool. My takeaway today was give away your best stuff and be selfless.
Yeah.
And share your story, share your message, become an expert in the marketplace. Start a podcast, commit to it for 6 months, and hire Danny Ozment, and go to emeraldcitypro.com. Danny, really appreciate you, man. I really appreciate you making time today to come over to the Chiro Hustle podcast and talk things about chiropractic as a non-chiropractor, but also talk about things of marketing, promotions, and sales.
Yeah, I was happy to be here and happy to help.
Yeah, so if you guys want to learn more, go to emeraldcitypro.com and get yourself to the launch, and get yourself to commitment, and get yourself podcasting. Like they say, the best time to plant a tree was yesterday. And I think the best time to start a podcast was yesterday too. So let's get it going. And I appreciate the opportunity to feature you today. You're episode 516 of the Chiro Hustle podcast. And I close out by telling everyone, you're just one story away. Keep hustling. I'll see you guys on the next episode. Appreciate you. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to Chiro Hustle. Don't forget to subscribe and check back next week to continue hustling.